Welcome to another episode of Bright Threads in the Tapestry, a series where I piece together the brightest threads from my favorite stories and analyze them to figure out what makes them shine. Today's bright thread is from Malazan Book of the Fallen. The title of the episode is Lessons in Brevity, which I borrowed from the fourth passage that we will discuss today. It's a quote by a certain Jagut, if you know. I'll go through four short passages. One of them is a bit longer, but I have a reason for choosing a longer section to read. I will explain as we go through the passages. So 4 passages. Each is a lesson in brevity, I suppose. There are 3 of them are sort of action or combat scenes, sort of. One is a bit of a detour, and it's a lesson in brevity because it's brief and it's a lesson in something. The others, well, they're just really short action scenes that were extremely effective, I thought were brilliantly done, and made me laugh a little bit in the middle of an intense moment simply because of how short they are. And they're all brilliantly done, and I remember them all months after I read them because they were so incredibly effective. So when I saw the quote by the Jagut, I knew exactly which passages I could apply said quote to, and so we have our bright thread. Before we get into it, though, I would like to apologize real quick for the erratic posting schedule I've had for this podcast. I meant for these to be weekly or bi-weekly episodes, and I still do. I'm trying to work out a way to make regular time each week or at least every 2 weeks to record an episode. When I made the original plan for the series, I did not anticipate that each one would take me approximately 5 hours to record and film. I should have known better, but anyway, now that I know how to plan my weeks. I'm anticipating my time to still be fairly busy until the end of the year because of travel and holidays and so on. But I do have 3, maybe even 4 more episodes planned for publishing before the end of the year. I just have to make time to record them, which has been the difficult bit, but I'm going to try to release 3 more episodes for the regular series and 1 sort of celebratory 10th episode because that's the one we'll get to. And then and also I've been sort of only circulating between Malazan, Fiona Tapestry, and Wars of Light and Shadow. I haven't added in any other authors yet. I will start to do so after the 10th episode. So yeah, watch out for all of that. If you've been following this podcast, thank you so much for your support, and I'm really sorry about the erratic posting schedule. I'm working on fixing it. Now on to the episode. I will be, as usual, reading a passage and then talking about what I appreciated about it or how it's relevant to the title of the bright thread, so to speak, for each one. The first one is the scene where Cutter kills Gorlas Vidicus. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, this will be spoilers for the full series. The passages I have picked are 3 of them are from Toll the Hounds and 1 from the Crippled God. He shook himself then, dispelling the scene, and found that he had halted just below the landing, one hand on the rail at his side. At that last moment, as the image burst apart, he thought he had caught a glimpse of something. A corpse twisting beneath a thick branch, the face swinging round to meet his own. Then gone. Gorlas found his mouth unaccountably dry. Had some god or spirit sent him a vision? Well, if something or someone had, it was a poor one, for he could make no sense of it. None at all. He tugged on his gloves and resumed the climb, emerging out into the blessed sunlight where everything was painted gold. Yes, the wealth of the world was within reach. He'd never understood poor people, their stupidity, their lack of ambition, their laziness. So much within reach. Couldn't they see that? And then how dare they bitch and complain and cast him dark looks when he went and took all that he could? Let them fall to the wayside. Let them tumble underfoot. He was going where he wanted to be, and if that meant pushing them out of the way or crushing them down, so be it. Why, he could have been born in the damned gutter and he'd still be where he was today. It was his nature to succeed, to win. The fools could keep their resentment and envy. Hard work, discipline, and the courage to grasp opportunity when it presented itself. These were all the things most people lacked. What they didn't lack, not in the least, was the boundless energy to complain. Bitterness was a waste of energy, and like acid, it ate the vessel that held it. As he came round the curve of the ridge, he saw at once that the man awaiting him was not Coll. Nor, Gorlas realized, was he a stranger. Gods below, can this be? Oberon, is it you so blessing me now? Pull me forward, lady. Shove him closer, lord. The young man, well, they were of the same age, but not in Gorlas's eyes, saw him approach and slowly dismounted, stepping round the horse and positioning himself in the center of the path facing Gorlas. She was not foolish enough to send you here, was she? You know me, then. Gorlas smiled. I watched you once, only a few days back, from across the street. You looked guilty, did you know that? You looked like a coward. What is your name? I want to know your name so I can be precise when I tell her what I've done to you. And your corpse. The man stood unmoving, arms at his sides. I am not here for Chalice, he said. If you want to think it was all your idea, fine. But I should tell you, I know her well. Far better than you. She's been working on you, filling your head. She's pretty much led you here by the hand, even if you're too thick to realize it. Of course, she probably didn't want anyone too smart, since a clever man would have seen through her deadly scheming. A clever man would have walked away. Or run. The man tilted his head slightly. What is the value of all this, Gorlas Vidicus? Gorlas sighed, glanced back at the foreman, who stood watching and listening. Yes, something would have to be done about that, and then faced the man once more. Since you're too much the coward to actually tell me your name, I will just have to slice off your face or take back to her as proof. Look at you, you're not even wearing a sword. Foreman, do we still have Murillo's rapier? I forget, did that go back with him? Not sure, sir. Want me to go and look? Well, find the way for sword. Anything will do. It's not as if he knows how to use it in any case. And hurry before we lose the light and the mob down there gets bored waiting. He smiled at the man. They've got bloodthirsty of late. My fault, that. Yes, about Murillo. Ah, is that why you've come? The duel was fairly fought. He simply could not match my skill. Where is the boy? So he's the reason you're here? This is getting difficult to believe. The child's not some orphan prince or something, is he? Rather, was he? Was? Yes, he's dead, I'm afraid. I see. So, still interested? Gorlas asked. Of course, that's not really relevant anymore because I want you to stay. I suppose you can try to run, but I assure you, you'll be cut down before you get astride that fine horse. A horse I will welcome in my stables. Tell me, are you a better duelist than Murillo was? You'll have to be, much better. The foreman had gone halfway down the trail before yelling instructions, and now a youth was scurrying up, cradling a sword. Not Murillo's, but something found in one of the workings from the look of it. Thin, tapered to a point that was slightly bent. Iron, at least, but the patina was a thick crust over the blade's spine, and both edges were severely notched. The handle, Gorlas saw as the foreman, breath-wheezing, delivered it, wasn't even wrapped. Sorry about the lack of grip, Gorlas said, but really, you should have come prepared. How did it feel? The man asked. Killing an old man. The duel was fair. Agreed to the death. I doubt that, Vidicus. I dislike the lack of respect in using my last name like that, especially when you won't even tell me your name. Well, your wife calls you useless, so if you'd prefer that. Gorlas flung the weapon at the man's feet, where it skidded in a puff of golden dust. On guard, he ordered in a rasp. To the death! The man made no move to pick up the weapon. He stood as he had before, head tipped a fraction to one side. You are a coward, in truth, Gorlas said, drawing his rapier. Cowards do not deserve to be treated with honor, so let us dispense with convention. I was waiting for you to say that. The foreman, standing off to one side, still struggling with the ache in his chest from a laboring heart, was in the process of licking his gritty lips. Before he had finished that instinctive flicker, the scene before him irrevocably changed. And Gorlas Vidicus was falling forward, landing hard. His rapier rolled from his hand to catch up in the grass lining the track. Dust puffed up, then slowly settled. The stranger, had he even moved? The foreman was unsure. Now turned to him and said, You heard him dispense with the rules of the duel, correct? The foreman nodded. And then they go on to have a conversation about how Cutter did not actually challenge the Gorlas to a duel, and then they have a conversation about the debt that the foreman owes Vidicus and how that can be maybe it wouldn't be illegal if he just waited for someone to come ask him to pay up and so on. That conversation is very interesting, but we'll not quite be discussing that today. I do want to read one last bit before we get into the discussion of this section. This passage right here about Harlow. Wait, this Harlow, was he that important? I mean, and the foreman gestured to encompass not only the corpse lying on the road, but the one that had been there the day before as well. All this killing. Who was Harlow? The man walked to his horse and swung himself into the saddle. He collected the reins. I'm not sure, he said after a moment's consideration. The way it started. Well, it seemed... He hesitated and then said, He was a boy nobody loved. Okay, so to be honest, that was a fairly long passage for me to have read for an example of a lesson in brevity. But I feel like it was necessary because the build-up is what makes the payoff, if you will, feel worth it or feel important or significant. The actual lesson in brevity here is the gap between the passages, where we switch from Gorlas Vidicus's perspective to that of the foreman, where we go from Cutter saying, I was waiting for you to say that, in response to Gorlas saying, cowards do not deserve to be treated with honor, and to the foreman watching Vidicus fall to his death in less time than it took him to finish licking his lips. Gorlas died in the gap between the passages, right? And that is a moment of such huge relief. Well, we don't know until we finish reading the first sentence of the second passage that he's actually dead. But as soon as that happens, it brought me such intense relief, and even I had to put the book down and laugh for a second because it happened so quickly. I didn't even see it coming. I thought we'd see a drawn out fighting scene between the two of them, and Cutter would eventually win, of course. I hoped, but I didn't think that this would happen so quickly. And what was important about the build-up here for me in the passage that preceded this, first of all, there is, of course, the inbuilt build-up within the book itself, like the various times we see Vidicus. I hated him more and more each time, but it all comes to a crescendo here in this scene. First, he killed Murillo, and he has no qualms about it. He's even feeling some joy or feeling proud of what he did there, with the as is evidenced by this statement here, where he says, oh, they've gotten bloodthirsty of late. My fault. That the cavalier attitude that he has about this, that is that angered me quite a bit. And then his whole monologue here about how, the sentence or the paragraph starts innocently enough about how he's enjoying the sunlight. What's wrong about that? Oh, he then goes on to say the wealth of the world was within reach and it was there for anyone who wanted to grab it. The poor people who didn't see that, they were just stupid, they lacked ambition, and they're just lazy because they have so much within reach and they're not even smart enough to just, all they have to do is reach out and grab it. And so, and we've seen, I think, variations of that and just him being a total ass throughout the book, if I remember correctly. But seeing this again after he's killed Murillo, that just adds something to the level of hatred that I feel towards this character. And then, again, I was feeling sorry about Chalice and how he's been treating her, and to think that this is what he thinks of her. If you want to think it was all your idea, fine, but I should tell you, I know her well, far better than you. She's been working on you, filling your head. She's pretty much led you here by the hand. So to see that he thinks so poorly of her, he has absolutely no respect for her, which of course we sort of knew, but again, to see it said hits differently somehow. And then his, again, complete lack of compunction on how he killed Murillo, all of that, and of course the pomposity with which he talks with Cutter, plus I guess the additional build up of intensity with just how, like, Cutter's not at all reacting to anything he's saying. The only reaction, if you want to call it that, to anything that Vidicus is doing on the page here is when Cutter says, your wife calls you useless, so if you'd prefer that. Except for that, he's just straight up, like, Cutter's intensity is visible in his lack of demonstration of it, if that makes sense. So all of this together, this scene has so much build up in it that it makes for this huge moment of release when we see the foreman watch Vidicus fall to his death, which, yeah, I think the moment was brilliantly done. I was amazed at how the lack of explanation or description here, how much it affected me, how effective this was, especially something as simple as this page break or a pause in the narrative when we're switching perspectives. That's where it happened, and that had such an effect on me. That was really amazing to me, and so I really appreciated this scene. I also did briefly read this section about Harlow when Carter says, the way it started, well, it seemed he was a boy nobody loved. That, again, it broke my heart a little bit. This is sort of unrelated to the thread about lessons in brevity, but, well, perhaps not, because that one sentence says so much. The boy was unloved. He was sent off to he was treated really horribly his entire life, and now he has so many people dying to bring him back. That, well, yay for Harlow. Really unfortunate, but, you know, if he had been loved, if he had some affection at any point. But yeah, so this also, we are talking about, I only brought this up because we're talking about the scene that leads up to it, but I thought this passage was extremely poignant and says so much in that one sentence as well. Now, on to the next one about Scorch. Okay, this next one is fairly short. It's just 2 paragraphs. I may talk about it for a long time, but the reading itself is fairly short. This scene is from Toll the Hounds. It's a scene after Scorch and Left talk to Krupp, and now they're just waiting at the docks for some people on their list to show up. I think they're trying to collect debt from the people on their list or something like that. So anyway, they're just Scorch and Left are sort of chilling by the ocean, waiting for some people to land. Below the inside docks, old women wandered in the gloom between pylons, using long, thin, barbed pokers to collect up the small, hand-length silverfish that managed to slip through the baskets and fall in gleaming rain as the catch was carried ashore. When the harvest was small, the old hags were wont to use those toothed pokers on each other. Scorch could see them from where he was perched, muffled forms moving this way and that, pokers darting in the perpetual shadows. "I swore to never again eat anything this lake gave up," he muttered. "Gran above," he added in a hoarse whisper. "You see, I remember them cuts and holes in your scrawny arms. I remember 'em, Gran, and so I swore." "What's that?" Lev asked from below. "Nothing, only we're wasting time." Okay, so that passage certainly was brief, so it qualifies for that portion of the lesson in brevity. So, what is it a lesson on, though? To explain that, I have to talk about this article called "We Don't Talk Like This: Dialogue in Fiction." That is on Mr. Erikson's blog. I stumbled upon it, I think, a few months before I picked up Toll the Hounds. And, well, over the course of the last 3-ish years that I've been reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen, I have listened to Erikson give a lot of writing advice. And I have to say, Olive's advice really clicks. Let me explain that a bit more. So when I was a pretty junior engineer several years ago, when I first started my career in software engineering, I was quite overwhelmed by a lot of like rules to follow on like how to write clean code and a lot of like design principles, which one applies in which situation. Everybody had a differing opinion. How do I choose what to do in what situations? I just felt very overwhelmed by all of that, and I'd spend hours where a decision could take me, I don't know, a few minutes. Like something that takes me now a few minutes to do would probably take me hours in the beginning, because I'd agonize over whether I'm doing the right thing and so on and so forth. Until a senior engineer gave me some advice, which really clicked. And his advice was really simple. It had nothing to do with all the rules that we're supposed to follow and like, all the various design principles that were clogging my head. All he said was, think about whether something belongs where you put it. And that was it. That and like a few other things about, how to name things and so on, which incidentally Erikson also talks about in some of his interviews. About, I think he mentioned that the first thing he comes up with is the name of a character, and then he decides what to do. Anyway, he fleshes them out more after he has a name, which is also something I do as a software engineer, interestingly, but that's neither here nor there. So the senior engineer's advice really clicked. So a few months ago, let's say, I wanted to start learning how to write. And I've written a few short stories since, and a lot of Erikson's advice has helped me get here, from his blog and from all the various YouTube videos I've watched where he does give writing advice. And it clicks the same way. Like all the things that I think about, that I didn't know where to start. I don't know how to do characters. I don't know how to write a scene. There's so much that I felt unsure of when I started out writing the first story. But his advice felt like, yeah, I can do this. This is something simple that I can follow. And I think that this article that I mentioned, We Don't Talk Like This: dialogue in fiction. It is about dialogue, yes, but there's one line here that really stood out to me. A bit part does not mean a bit life. Well, so just a quick summary. There are two examples of dialogue here of our hero, an exchange between our hero and a barkeep, in which in one instance the barkeep just spouts a bunch of information that we need the hero to know so that they can move on in the story. And then in the next one, the barkeep is like, giving his backstory, talking about his mother, and like, so it's absolutely brilliant. I like, even just the example, you can see what it does. It's so illustrative. And then he goes on to say that a bit part does not mean a bit life, and that again really clicked as a piece of writing advice. And then I sort of saw this here as an application of that. Scorch and Lef, so far, I think we've met them in 2 or 3 different instances so far. This is about page 107 in Toll the Hounds. And every time so far, they've been a pair of idiots. Like, these clowns, I could not take them seriously at all. And they were largely there for comic effect. Like, every time they were on the pages, some comic relief to be had, even to the very end. Except for this thing that Scorch thinks to himself about his grandmother, that I swore to never again eat anything this lake gave up, because he remembers the cuts and holes on his grandmother's scrawny arms, which lent some depth and seriousness to the character. I still had to laugh a lot and roll my eyes every time these two came on the page. And also there's some like sort of reflected depth to Lef because of this. I'm like, oh my god, I've only thought of these two as clowns. And Scorch has so much depth to him. What if Lef does too? So it made it so much harder to dismiss them as just a pair of idiots, if that makes sense. So, I think this really stood out to me as a fantastic example of what I just read about. And, like I have been on the hunt for examples that I can borrow from and so on. Like, I suppose what is typically the learning to write process. But anyway, I thought this was a brilliant example and more advice that just clicked. So there we are. On to the next one, which is a scene between Anomander, Rake, and Hood. So this scene is the one in which Rake kills Hood, or at least strikes him down with Dragnipur. And it happens over 2 sentences. I am going to read that entire paragraph-ish passage, because there's more things I want to talk about there. But yeah, I'll do the reading first and then we can do the discussion. Only 3 strides between them now. Hood slowed his steps. "Son of darkness," he said, "I have reconsidered," and the sword lashed out, a clean arc that took the Lord of Death in the neck, slicing clean through. As Hood's head pitched round inside its severed cloth sack, the body beneath it staggered back, dislodging what it had lost. A heavy, solid crunch as the god's head struck the cobbles, rolling on to one cheek, the eyes staring and lifeless. Black blood welled up from the stump of neck. One more step back, before the legs buckled and the Lord of Death fell to his knees and then sat back. Opposite the dead god, Anomander Rake, face stretching in agony, fought to remain standing. Whatever weight descended upon him at this moment was invisible to the mortal eye, unseen even by the 1,000 great ravens perched and leaning far forward on all sides, but its horrendous toll was undeniable. The son of darkness, Dragnipur in one hand, bowed and bent like an old man. The sword's point grated and then caught in the joint between 4 cobbles, and Anomander Rake began to lean on it, every muscle straining as his legs slowly gave way. No, he could not stand beneath this weight. And so he sank down, the sword before him, both hands on the cross hill's wings, head bowed against Ragnipur. And these details alone were all that distinguished him from the god opposite. They sat, knees and haunches, as if mirrored images, one leaning on a sword, forehead pressed to the gleaming, smoke-wreathed blade, the other decapitated, hands resting palm up on the thighs. One was dead. The other, at this moment, profoundly vulnerable. Things noticed. Things were coming, and coming fast. And this night, why, it is but half done. Now, this scene here is what lent the bright thread its name, indirectly, as we shall see in the next passage that we read. But this was possibly one of my favorite scenes in all of the Malazan Book of the Fallen that I have read so far. It is absolutely brilliantly done. I have to start by saying I don't tend to visualize when I read, but this scene, I have such a clear picture in front of my eyes when I finished reading, and it is so evocative. Part of it is because, of a scene earlier when we see it's between Rake and the priest Endestilan, when Rake puts his sword inside stone and the stone shakes, right? So we know that there's this huge weight that he's carrying, and he's the only one who can bear this burden. And a lot of people, I think especially Apsalar's perspective, the thief goddess, her perspective, especially when she thinks to herself that Rake is the only one who could carry the weight. He's the only one that they feel comfortable burdening this way and who would accept the burden and so on. And now he's finally giving in. So the main lesson in Brevity here was just these two lines, which again made me laugh a little bit because Rake didn't even let Hood finish his sentence. He just slashed him dead within the span of a short sentence, just like with Cutter and Vidicus, except Hood so far has done nothing to earn my ire. I don't even know what's going on between these two, and I am, let's say, 3/4 of the way into the Crippled God. I still don't know what happened here. So, well, maybe I do and I don't remember, but so I have no reason to hate Hood or anything like that. It's just the scene was so effective in how short it was, how no nonsense it was. And then we move on to the effect on Rake. The son of darkness, Dragnipur in one hand, bowed and bent like an old man, the sword's point grated, and then caught in the joint between four cobbles. And, well, basically, Rake is giving way to the burden that he has carried for so long. And then this mirror image between the two. They sat on knees and haunches as if mirrored images. All of this, like, this scene is so rich in its description, and the image is so evocative. I still have this picture in front of my head, like somewhat disturbing. One headless and the other just so profoundly vulnerable, to borrow Erikson's words. This is a really brilliantly done scene, and it is both a lesson in brevity for what happens in those first two sentences, but also how very, very effective it is for how much is said in these short paragraphs. So moving on to the next one, where we know we see how Hood takes this lesson. So this last passage is the one from which I borrowed the name of this episode. It's the scene in which Hood steps out from a gate in Colands and then basically eats or bites Equity, the Focrul Assail. I'll read it real quick and then we'll talk about it. I know you, she said. You are Hood. The Jagut stepped forward, the gate swelling closed behind him. Hood paused, regarding each witness in turn, and then walked towards Equity. They made you their king, she whispered. They who followed no one chose to follow you. They who refused every war fought your war. And what you did then, what you did. As he reached her, his desiccated hands caught her. He lifted her from her feet, and then, mouth stretching, he bit into the side of her face. The tusks drove up beneath her cheekbone, burst the eyes on that side. In a welter of blood, he tore away half of her face, and then bit a second time, up under the orbitals, the tusks driving into her brain. Equity hung in his grip, feeling her life drain away. Her head felt strangely unbalanced. She seemed to be weeping from only one eye, and from her throat no words were possible. I once dreamed of peace. As a child, I dreamed of... ShareAlike stared in horror as the Jagut flung the corpse away. From his gore-drenched mouth fell fragments of scalp and skull. Then Hood faced them, and in a dry, toneless voice he said, I have never much liked Focrul. No one spoke. Filash stood trembling, her face pale as death itself. Beside her, the handmaid had set her hands upon the axes at her belt, but seemed unable to move beyond that futile, diffident gesture. ShareAlike gathered herself and said, You have a singular way of ending a discussion, Jagut. The empty pits seemed to find her, somehow, and Hood said, We have no need of allies. Besides, I recently learned a lesson in brevity, ShareAlike, which I have taken to heart. A lesson. Really. Who taught you that? The Jagut looked away, across the water. Ah, my death ship. I admit it was a quaint affectation. Nonetheless, one cannot help but admire its lines. Princess Filash, 14th daughter of Bolkando, fell to her knees and was sick in the sand. So, once again, this was a short, quick, an extremely effective scene. We see, I think, Hood kills Equity in mid-sentence, the same way that Rake killed him. Killed, I think. I don't know what to say anymore about Hood's state of being alive or dead, but it's easy to say killed, so let's use that word, I guess. But, we saw just in the previous instance that Hood was mid-sentence when Rake slashed him down, and Equity is mid-sentence when Hood slashes her down, in as much as killing someone with your tusks is slashing them down, I suppose. Yeah, that counts. And, well, and then he follows up by saying this is because he had a lesson in brevity. And, well, first, ShareAlike's joke that he has a singular way of ending a discussion, that was hilarious. And who, by the way, ShareAlike is hilarious. I realized that during my reading of Dust of Dreams and the Crippled God, as far as I've gotten in the Crippled God. I didn't register just how funny Elal was on her own, because she was always in a scene with Tehol before that, as far as I remembered. And I attributed the comedy in that conversation mostly to Tehol, but she's hilarious by herself. And she's, of course, in typical Elal style, saying, you have a singular way of ending a discussion, Jagut. To which Hood says, what does he say? He says, we have no need of allies. Besides, I recently learned a lesson in brevity. So he is applying that lesson quite literally here, isn't he? Well, except for the striking down with the sword, but he cut someone down mid-sentence and in a very singular way, as Elal said. So this scene I found very amusing. And yeah, there was a certain amount of shock in seeing Hood back, which I suppose I should have expected, but I didn't. And then the way he entered the stage again was absolutely brilliant. I loved this scene and I wanted to share. And it also did the great job of giving me the name of the episode. I guess the other thing that connected all of these examples that I discussed today was how they were all, except for the Scorch one, the one about Scorch and his grandma, the three action scenes that I discussed, so to speak, they were all in the middle of very intense moments, right? Or they made, if the moment wasn't already intense, the scene made the action that was brief, made the moment intense. But somehow the fact of the brevity made the scene also funny to a certain extent, which I thought is very interesting. Just how short something is can change. Like it's not taking away from the intensity, but it's still adding a certain amount of comic element to it, which, well, not the one with Rake and Hood, because that's immediately followed with the weight that Rake feels. So, I smiled for like 2 seconds before we switched to feeling ridiculously bad for Rake in that scene. But even that 2 seconds of smile that the mid-sentence slashing brought to my face, I thought that's very interesting. Is that just me? I guess this is the point where I asked the question. Is that just me, or did you, when you were reading these passages, also think they were just a little funny? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next Bright Thread episode, which will be from the Fiona Tapestry. Thank you so much. Bye.